Okay, so this will be the last update on this for a little while. I find it quite ironic that my Z-axis test rig actually is now better than my actual Z-axis. But so this is my sort of the production version of the wobble compensator. Obviously, important to state that this is inspired by all of the hard work that the Hevort team have done in just this area and the wobble wings as they were described. The only reason that I'm not using their designs almost verbatim is that I had one concern, which may or may not be relevant, regarding the use of two bearings per Oldham coupler layer. So I'm using 4. I could use 3, but the layout and the structural integrity of the pieces is easier to maintain with 4 because the rails now then go, the little rails, I should say, the little rods go all the way through one side, whereas if you've got 3, they've got to be very, very short, and then it's very difficult to make sure that they're aligned properly, whereas this way you can have a hole straight through the part. Any small errors will just get shimmed out because they're unlikely to bend the rod as it goes in. And that makes the whole thing a lot easier to do. Let me just show you what I'm talking about. So you see that the rod goes all the way through. I'm using 6mm bearings now. And there are magnets underneath each of these. The middle layer has a set of 4 magnets that are halfway between this one and this one, and then there's a set of 4 magnets on the bottom and a set of 4 magnets on the top. Okay, so in the setup I've got, as I mentioned in the last video, linear rails providing rigidity, and that would ultimately be coupled to the bed, and the intent for the lead screw is for it to only provide thrust. There's a question about drop, as I mentioned last time, and there is definitely a problem with drop when this isn't weighted. So in a real life situation, at the very bare minimum, the bed would be on here, so you'd have a third or half of the bed's weight pushing down on here. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So as if I'm dropping, it's not doing it this time. There, can you see the twist? So because it's not dropping as quickly, well, not necessarily as quickly, but there isn't as much force keeping these things compressed, there's the possibility for them to come out of their magnetic holdings and twist. But with it, even the slightest force on there, it's not a problem at all. Oops. Let me just reset that. Okay. So let's get on to the whole point of this. I've unconstrained it at the top. In a production environment, you'd now want to constrain it at the top. I know that a lot of people recommend that with low accuracy consumer grade 3D printers, you constrain at the bottom and at the bed level and not at the top. And they're absolutely right. If there's any bend whatsoever, by constraining it here and here, you're forcing the deviation to happen at the bed level. But with this, other than rotationally and thrust-wise, you're actually decoupling it from this point entirely, as a result of which there's only one point of coupling, so you do actually want 2 points of coupling. And that will potentially cause more wobble here than there would have been in a situation without this, and with it constrained just down here. The difference being that wobble, regardless whether it's amplified or not, is now dealt with, whereas previously most of the wobble would be up here, but that impulse could still cause deviation down here. Okay, so let's run this up. You can see a very gradual change, which indicates that this isn't perfectly parallel, but nothing that changes per tooth, to point out that if there was wobble on this, that is the screw was bent, then within one full revolution of it, it would go to an extent on this side to an extent on that side. So you'd be expecting the oscillation to be roughly matching, well, exactly matching one revolution. So yeah, that appears to be working. To show it in more detail, you can see that the screw can be quite out of alignment while still completely coupling from a torque perspective. And obviously that would be even more so with any kind of weight. Oops. Sorry, I keep forgetting the extents that this thing is actually allowed to point to. But yeah, let's say if I drive it from up here. Now, if I actually hit the side, you can see that it's actually making a difference, but you've got a good 2 mil on either side's clearance before it's a problem. And if a lead screw was out by more than 2 mil from here to here, then you'd be in a much worse place, and you'd be wanting a new lead screw regardless. So yeah, as I said, the only downside is when you're coming down, you need weight. Otherwise, it can come decoupled. But in all situations in which you're using it, you would have weight. The only situation I can think of is if your acceleration, your Z acceleration, is over 9,800 millimeters per second, which is gravity, and then your screw could drop faster than weight, and in which case the bed would effectively be weightless very briefly. But I don't think that's likely. There's a possibility that with Z hops on very high acceleration it might be an issue. In a situation like that, what you'd want is a coupler between this layer and here that skates freely. Now, you don't need to provide any torque to this point, so you don't need to do all of this again. So what I was thinking was, say for example, if you had a PTFE washer here and then extend this out a little bit here and have 2 screws up onto a top piece. In an ideal world, you'd want 3 screws that came up to here and just squeezed that to that. But whatever it was resting on up here could smoothly wobble around as well. And again, just providing pressure on it. But I don't know if that's necessary. Anyway, so this is my production version. I'm probably going to put that on my Mercury 1 for now, and then continue to work on the Z-axis and see if I can, well, decide whether or not I'm going to do dual or triple Z, and even see whether or not I'm going to be tempted by those ball screws, like everybody else. Thanks a lot.